right, welcome back everybody. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome to Notes to Fret, where we are all about turning theory into riffs. And in this video, we are going to jump into every guitarist's favorite, the power chord. But before we jump into that, the first thing I want to do is kind of plant a thought in everyone's mind that when we think about power chords, this is what we typically think about, and it's 100% accurate in my opinion. All right, now let's go ahead and jump into power chords. I will fully acknowledge that Bohemian Rhapsody is not a power chord tune. There are power chords in it, obviously, but what we just listened to, there's a lot more to it. But it's a great tune, and that scene from Wayne's World, I just thought epitomized everything that we think about when we think about power chords. But with that being said, if you haven't done so already, go ahead and take a look at the website, because there are some free PDF downloads that I think will help you out quite a bit for working through chords on your own. PDF is free to download. You can print it out. And we'll just give you a good feel for working through some of the chord conversations that we're having. So check that out when you get an opportunity. Now, when we talk about power chords, we're talking about a chord with two notes, right? And so you can never have too many notes, and can you have too few notes? I don't know. But regardless, you may be looking at this and say, why are power chords called dyads, right? We talked about in a previous video triads. Obviously, tri mean three. So wouldn't it make more sense to call these byads for two notes? But in music, we like to, throw things in there a little bit. So we use terms from Greek as well as Latin. So we have dyads. Now, I just wanted to point that out in case you ever hear that term, right? You'll hear triads all the time. But if you ever do hear dyads, it's a chord with two notes. But we're talking specifically here about power chords. And power chords are built using only two notes. However, they're built using two very specific notes, the root and the perfect fifth. And I want to emphasize perfect fifth here, not augmented fifth, not diminished fifth. When we talk about power chords, we're talking about the perfect fifth. And we'll dive into this a little bit more later, but you'll also hear somebody come out and say, oh, well, a power chord is just a dyad. Okay, well, to that point, dyads use two notes, or you'll hear other folks say, dyads use two tones. That's fine. Whichever. As guitar players, we're certainly not that worried about it. Neither one is 100% correct, or neither one is 100% incorrect. So whichever one you want to use, go for it. But the two notes for our power chords are the root and, again, the perfect fifth. So one of the things I just want to point out really quick here is, while a dyad is a chord that has two notes, a power chord is a two-note chord that has a very specific root and perfect fifth. Therefore, a power chord is a dyad, but not all dyads are power chords. So little backstory on that one, but we'll dive into power chords moving forward, but I wanted to get that part out of the way. Now, when it comes to power chords, what we are looking at, and I'm going to use the example of the C power chord for a moment. When we think about the triads, we think about stacked thirds, right? A major third over a minor third over a major third, whatever it may be. But with power chords, do we talk about multiple intervals, right? So we've spoken about the root and the perfect fifth, which is fantastic, but we didn't really talk about the third. So when it comes to power chords, that third gets a little, kind of a gray area. And we have spoken at length in previous videos about the third being the most important critical interval you can ever possibly imagine. However, The power chord, when it really gets broken down, the power chord doesn't have multiple intervals. It has a single interval. And that interval has no inclusion of the third whatsoever. So there is no third. The power chord has a single interval. That's it. So this stacked third concept pretty much goes away. But what does come into play is the root to the perfect fifth. So looking at a power chord, it may be easier just to look at it in terms of the perfect unison or the root and the perfect fifth, right? And this is a very easy diagram to look at. There aren't multiple intervals. There is a single interval, and that is the perfect fifth. So when we think about a chord, triad or add seventh or add ninth or minor seventh or it doesn't matter, right? A chord has a certain characteristic. It has a certain feel. It has a certain punch. It has a certain je ne sais quoi, whatever it has, whatever you want to define it as. What I'm going to define that kind of magical thing is I'm just going to call it the sound, right? What gives the chord its sound? Again, you know, a lot of musicians or composers out there will say, oh, what gives it a feel? Okay, fine. In these videos, I'm just saying what gives the chord its sound. Well, in order to figure out what the sound is, you have to construct it first, right? So all chords are constructed from intervals, right? And we spoke about the triad. It could be a minor third over a major third or a major third over a minor third. It doesn't matter, right? We can do minor seconds over diminished fourths, or we could do major seconds over, augmented sevenths, whatever. We construct a chord from putting intervals together. Whatever those intervals are is up to us. And then, as certain intervals get put together, they start to get kind of crazy names. But that's how a chord is constructed. Now, when we talk about what gives the chord its sound, is what's the distance between those intervals, right? So that's why, a minor third and a major third, or a major third and a minor third, that combination of intervals sounds very good. It's the distance between each one of those intervals that really starts to make up that chord sound, right? Does it sound really disturbing? Does it sound really, we'll call it stable? Does it sound really cohesive? Does it sound a little bit sad? Does it sound a little bit happy? All of that is determined on the distance of the intervals that we start to put together. And we'll explore more of this when we get into more advanced chords. But I want to bring this up because there's a very important thing when it comes to power chords. It's extremely important. What we have to remember is in typical triads, the third is what gives the chord its quality. And we'll talk more about quality here in a moment, but I want you to put that in the back of your mind that the third is what gives the chord its quality. However, what the perfect fifth gives a chord is incredible consonance. And what consonance means is a really solid sounding structure. It sounds good, if you will. Now, consonance does have a little bit of a different context when we start talking about chord progressions. And we talk about consonance meaning we have a really stable sound pulling away from the root and coming back to the root, right? There's a lot of consonance there if it sounds good. But I'm going to use the word stability. And when I talk about stability, it just means notes or chords that go very well together. There's no, moment in the song where you go, woo, that sounded a little bit weird. If everything just sounds good, I'm going to call it stable for now, right? And that is also kind of synonymous with consonance, but a little bit of nuance in there. But regardless, I'm going to refer to it as stable. Now, when we're looking at the chord sound, when we talk about quality, right, we're talking about the quality of the third. And the third gives us an opportunity within a chord to make it minor or major. And we've all heard, somewhere that minor chords are sad and major chords are, happy, like almost obnoxiously happy. So the third really gives us that quality, right? Do we want to write a song that's sad about a breakup, or do we want to write a song that's happy about, finding the love of your life? And the third matters because that's going to be the chords that we want to emphasize, right? The sad or the happy sort of thing, right? So that's the quality. So when we look at this is just an A minor chord, right? We've got a minor third over a major third, and that gives us gives us a minor triad. This is A minor. Or we can just say, a minor third over a perfect fifth, and that's fine too. But here, if we were looking at this, we would say, okay, well, this would probably be a sad chord, quasi, whatever. But, we wouldn't put in an A minor to like the happiest moment in our song. Maybe we would, maybe we wouldn't. But it really is that third that gives us our quality, right? Now, when we look at the power chord, well, the power chord just goes from A to E, which gives us our perfect fifth, which essentially means that we lose that quality. We do lose quality when it comes to power chords, but what we get in return is an incredible amount of stability or consonance, right? Depending on how you want to look at it. And that's why they sound good. You can just hit a power chord out of nowhere and you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to be okay because it's going to come out sounding pretty stable, right? And that's why a lot of us use it as guitar players. I use them all the time. I love them. But we got to talk about some of the drawbacks to them as well. So if we talk about our triad chords, right, we're going to kind of do a comparison here between our triads, which are our three notes, right, our major chords or our minor chords, and that we get that from the third, right? In this case, we're looking at the C major chord, and we get that major feel because of the E. But when we look at power chords, we don't really have that third anymore. Now we just have the perfect fifth. And you can see that these two chords look very similar with the exception of the third, right? So they both have C and G, which gives us that perfect fifth interval. A lot of stability, not a lot of characteristic. So if we're going to look at our intervals, once again, over to the left of the page, I highlighted the tritone here just really quick because when we talk about power chords, inevitably the conversation of pentatonic scales comes up. And there's a reason that pentatonic scales have eliminated a couple of the notes from the diatonic scale. And the diatonic scale, if you watch any of my videos on the major, minor scales or any of the modes, that's the diatonic scale, right? All 7 notes. Whereas in a pentatonic, we have 5 notes. It has a lot to do with kind of moving past this tritone. So I'm going to highlight the tritone here just to plant the seed about the tritone. Okay. We'll get to it in later videos, but I want to plant the seed. So when we talk about triads, when we go from the root to the third, in this case, we go to a major third, right? And we know that a major third, we just move up 4 frets, right? So from C to E is 4 frets, and that gives us our good major sound. And then from there, right, we're stacking thirds. So then we go from E to G, which is a minor third, but that's just 3 more frets that we move up. So we wind up with a perfect fifth. No problem. But when we look at that triad, we see the 2 various thirds, right? We see the major third and the minor third, right? But if we look at the power chord, we're just going from the root to the perfect fifth. And that means we just straight up ignore everything and we just move up 7 frets to the perfect fifth, right? We're not, there's nothing that we're going in between, right? It is from the root to the perfect fifth, and that's what gives us our power chord. And that's 100% completely legit. Now, if we look at the tritone at the top, let's say that I were going to make that E into an E flat. That means we would have a minor third followed by a major third. Okay, now we have this minor feel, right? Now we have C minor. So technically this is kind of like a sad chord, whatever. And when we look at C to E flat, we have a minor third, which we know is just 3 frets. But that's followed by a major third, right? From E flat to G. And that's 4 more frets. So we wind up back at the perfect fifth. But this gave us a sad feel. But when we look at the power chord and we're talking about the perfect fifths, well, our power chord hasn't changed at all, but our triad has. It's changed from happy when we used E, C to E, and it changed to sad when we went from C to E flat, right? But our power chord didn't change anything there. So essentially, our power chord has pretty much negated our third, and it's made that major third from E flat to G kind of a moot point, right? Whatever. Now, if we take a look at that, we still have the root to the perfect fifth. And if we look back over at our intervals, the grayed out area, we have eliminated all of this musical tonality. We've ignored 6 intervals to get our power chord, which has a lot of stability, but you can't really talk about, hey, this is a musical masterpiece when I've eliminated everything from the minor second down to the tritone. Like that's a lot of musical interest that just gets thrown right out the window, and at the cost of stability, right? So just going to the perfect fifth, okay, it's stable. It sounds good, but there's a lot of creativity that you might lose in there. And furthermore, I think a lot of guitarists will go, well, I'm just going to make everything a power chord, and that saves me any issues with triads or any formal music theory. I can just make everything a power chord. Okay, you can, but we'll talk about the shortcomings on that in a minute. But one of the things that I do want to point out that it does not save you from is if we're looking at here, it's just a C major scale, and you can look at any major scale, it doesn't matter. The 7th is always going to be diminished, right? In this case, we have B diminished, right? So the 7th note of the scale, always going to be diminished. And if we look at that, when we talk about the B diminished, we always talk about the diminished chord kind of being off limits. Well, you may think, well, I've got this power chord now. It's back on, right? It's back on the menu. Well, let's take a look at that really quick. If we go from B to C, right? So C is our second. We move up 1 fret. Okay, so far so good. And we just moved up a minor second. Well, one thing here, obviously, that I want to point out, right? Moving from B to C is still a half step. It doesn't matter how you slice it. I just don't want to draw this thing out, 3,000 times horizontally. So we're just kind of coming back. Regardless, B to C, no matter how you slice it, is a half, or it's 1 fret. It's a half step. All right. Somebody out there is going to say, oh, well, what about if you move up the full octave? Yes, but move up to B a full octave, and B to C is a half step, right? 1 fret. And so that's the premise that I'm going on here. So then we move from C to D, which is a whole step, 2 more frets. Then we move from D to E, which is 2 more frets. And then finally, we move from E to F, which is another 1 fret or half step, right? And so when we look at B to F, F is the 5th of B, okay? So we get from B to F by moving up a half step, a whole step, a whole step, a half step, right? And that's how we get to the 5th. However, that half step, half step, it might be a 5th, right? F is definitely the 5th of B, but it's only 6 frets, which kind of brings us to our tritone, but since we're talking about in context of the fifth, it's a diminished fifth, right? And so therefore, because B to F is a fifth, excuse me, but it's only 6 frets, that gives us a diminished fifth, right? So again, B to F might give us a fifth, but it is not a power chord because it is a diminished fifth, not a perfect fifth, okay? So even with perfect or even with power chords, it doesn't save you from absolutely everything. Now, jumping ahead just a moment, there are things that we can use called borrowed chords that come from neighboring keys, right? So if you did like a B flat power chord here, you'd probably sound okay, but you risk sounding like you're in the key of F. So anyways, there are ways to kind of get around this, but it's not because of the power chord that's saving you. It's because of borrowed chords that's kind of saving you. So if you hear anybody say, oh, well, you know, you can just use a power chord and just use a B or a B flat, they're probably referring to borrowed chords. We'll get more into that. If you want to ignore everything I just said, go for it. But again, going from B to F is a diminished fifth. It's not a power chord because it's not a perfect fifth. Now, what I want to close out here with really quick is some of the strengths and weaknesses of using power chords. First, with the power chord, it's extremely difficult to sound bad. If you hit a power chord, it's going to sound pretty good. A lot of stability. However, it's also extremely difficult to sound original. Like, it's been done. Power chords have been done for an awfully long time, and you don't really have any context. You just have a stable sounding chord. And what do I mean by context is you kind of lose the character, right? So we talked about major chords being happy and minor chords being sad, right? So there's an issue there. You lose that characteristic. Your power chord's going to sound neither, right? It's not going to sound happy or sad. So if you're writing a song about finding the love of your life or losing the love of your life, you kind of lose that story, right? Your songs that you're putting together really are the story that you're telling musically. And if you just stick with power chords, you lose that, or you rely very, very heavily on other areas of the band, whether it's the bassist, your melodic leads, lyrics, any number of things, which has its place, but it's kind of also the difference between a one-hit wonder, right? You might, if you had 12 songs using nothing but power chords, one of them might resonate with an audience, but all 12 of them probably aren't, because you don't really have much character in the song. So there are reasons that, bands like Motley Crue or Prince or Elton John, there's a reason that they have, incredible song after song after song. They expand, right? They use the musical characteristic. So just keep that in mind. I don't think power chords are bad. I don't think they're the end all either. So keep it in mind. They're great to, when you're starting off, use power chords, all you can. But as you mature as a musician, you'll want to take a look at other things. So anyways, I think I'm going to go ahead and stop the video there. Thanks again, everyone, for watching. I really enjoy putting these videos together. This one wound up going a little bit longer than I thought it would for power chords, but I think there was some context in there that I thought was very important that wanted to get out. So, with that being said, as always, I really do appreciate everybody watching. And if you want to help out the channel, give me a thumbs up, a subscription. It's free. Really helps the channel out with everything with YouTube. So with that being said, that's pretty much the only video I'm going to put out with power chords. And in the next video, I'll continue the conversation with triads. Thanks again for everyone for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Take care, everybody.